to Leadership Conversations, presented to you by Lead Like Jesus. I'm Karen Conley, and so glad to have you join me today. And I want to introduce you to our guest for today. This is Brian Kluth. Brian, welcome to the Zoomcast.
Well, welcome. Hey, so glad to be with you.
Well, for those of you who may not know Brian, you may actually not realize you've heard him. He's had the opportunity to speak all over the country in both as an author, but also representing a conversation that we're going to have today around this topic of bless your pastor. And so, Brian, this is such an important topic and one that I would love for you to speak into. And as I was looking at your bio, I realized you are the perfect person to have this conversation, because it sounds like your professional career has really stretched over ministry and generosity and all of the things that would wrap up into important perspective. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up in this particular role.
Yeah, Karen, thank you so much. I've had quite an interesting journey. I did camp ministry for 10 years, raised missionary support. 6 years, I was president of the Christian Stewardship Association. That kind of was a predecessor before Christian Leadership Alliance. So I did that for 6 years, and then God called me to be a pastor when I was 45 years old, and I took a $70,000 pay cut to become a senior pastor. So that was a big step down financially. But I had a great experience, 10 years as a senior pastor of a First Evangelical Free Church in Colorado Springs. And then I went to 7 years of being a generosity minister to the world. And I would write and speak and do research on generosity as a Christian value. What does that look like? And then 3.5 years ago, I was invited to lead the multi-million-dollar grant project for the National Association of Evangelicals. And part of that is the Bless Your Pastor movement. And then we also have financial health training for pastors and churches. So I'm kind of spearheading those two efforts under the NAE umbrella.
Well, I know as I was looking at the website, you really have a ministry that reaches so many different audiences, and that you're trying to help the pastors. You're getting businessmen involved and ways that broadcasters can be involved in this, as well as people who are sitting in the pews, or I guess stadium seats is probably also another vernacular these days. So I know that in our time together, we're not going to hit all of those different areas, but I really want to encourage any person who is a person of faith to make sure that they listen to this entire Zoomcast, and hopefully we'll get to do a part 2 as well. I think what you have to say is often an unheard message in the faith community. And so I'm privileged to have you here today and to share from your perspective. I have spent 20 plus years as a pastor's wife. Okay. So this is a topic that hits very close to home for me. From your journey in that season as a senior pastor, why is this specifically important to you? What did you learn in that 9 years that maybe you would not have realized otherwise?
Well, I think there are several things that I learned. And one is that God provides for his servants, and he uses a paycheck, but he's not limited to a paycheck. And when a paycheck is not big enough, and for the majority of pastors in America today, that's the case. 50% make less than $50,000 a year. 60% receive no benefits from their congregation. So a lot of pastors face financial challenges that most Christians aren't aware of. But what I discovered was that God truly provides, but often it can be with the paycheck and outside of the paycheck. It's the loving acts of kindness and care and support of individual Christians that makes a huge difference. And then also the board is very significant in how do they properly care for their pastors and staff. And again, many of them are not trained in that or don't have experiences with that. So the congregation and the board both have a place to really make sure their staff and their pastor are cared for well.
One of the things that I often talk about is you present the problem and then you define the solution. And I think your website does that in a great way, even talking about the myths and the realities. And then I know there has been some research done. You just mentioned one statistic that 50% of pastors earn less than $50,000 a year. These were some of the other statistics that were just, honestly, I think most people probably would be shocked to learn this. But it says 60% of pastors receive no retirement, health care, or employee benefits from their church. 1% of pastors serve at churches over 1,000 people. And so, and then the average church budget, this was surprising to me, the average church budget in America is only $125,000, which includes facilities, missions, giving, payroll, and all programs.
Yes.
Was that surprising to you, given your journey?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it's that low was a bit of a shocker. We researched over 4,000 senior pastors in over 18 different denominations to come up with those numbers. So it's pretty much an across the board kind of a perspective. And yeah, those numbers are shocking. There's also 30% are carrying student loans of average of $36,000. Significant number are carrying credit card debt, medical debt. And so, yeah, behind the scenes of I'm doing fine, everything's great, there's really some struggles at home when it comes to finances. But the average pastor doesn't have anywhere to turn because they say, well, my church is doing the best they can and my denomination can't help me. So they they feel a bit trapped because who do they go talk to or what do they do about these challenges? And so most of them just suffer in silence.
Well, having been a pastor's wife, it is one of those situations where it almost never feels right to bring up,
Correct.
and so it feels selfish or not, you must not trust God enough, or somehow you're ungodly that you can't live off of less. And it really is a situation that I think you being this voice can really help a lot of pastors by educating others around them and saying things that you can't say in your own church a lot of times.
You really did you hit the nail on the head. The average pastor or pastor couple cannot say anything. It feels completely awkward and uncomfortable. And they also kind of know that the church doesn't have a lot of money. So there's kind of like, what's the board supposed to do about it? So there's when you're trapped into the budget only, and the bless your pastor takes everything away. Everything to do with the bless your pastor has nothing to do with the church budget. And so that's the beauty of it. So you're really trying to open it up to the family of God, but helping people understand what they can do individually to care for their pastor. And then again, also providing resources through the bless your pastor to church boards on what they specifically can do to make sure they're doing the best job they can.
Yeah. One of the things that I'd love to do is maybe in this first Zoomcast, us focus on people in leadership within a church organization. This is a ministry that is full of leaders who love God. It's Lead Like Jesus. And so you might be listening to this and think, well, I'm not an elder, or I'm not on the board, or I'm not a trustee, or whatever the governance is of your church. You might think, oh, but that's not me. But the body is made up of all of us. And the more that leaders and people within the body can be aware of what the options are and to ask good questions of your leadership is really important. So I want to encourage everyone as we take a little bit of a dive into some ways that the church itself in its governments, the way that the church leadership might be able to help in this situation. I just wanted to say that as a encouragement to everyone. I think, and you may have more recent statistics, Brian, I think the average tenure of a pastor is 3 years.
Yeah, it depends a lot on the denominational structure and background, but yeah, across America, it's usually fairly short. At my church, I was there 10 years, and I was the longest pastor at 115 years.
Wow.
So 115 years, my 10-year tenure was the record.
Yeah, well, and that's a sad commentary, but I think this is the stress and the pressure I think people don't necessarily understand. It was funny, my kids would come home and they know that their dad has trying the best he can to balance his family time with all the needs of the church, but they saw him up early and out late and carving out time, and they'd go to school and they'd have friends even as teenagers like, well, what did your dad do during the week? And so there's just this real misconception. So this is a way that I think, as we focus in on how the church leadership can help, begins a great dialogue. Maybe to start off with, the Bless Your Pastor came up with 7 best ways that your church can bless your pastor and staff. I wondered if I might be able to, you probably know these by heart, but I wanted to just have you maybe speak into them just a little bit. And that way, if it can just be maybe something to intrigue people to get on your website, learn more, and really be a blessing to their entire church. But the first was this: to compensate your pastor and staff using national research. Why is national research important in that?
Well, this is really important. I just want to comment to everyone watching. You can go to blessyourpastor.org, and all the materials there are free. And what we're talking about right now is in the church toolkit, church leaders toolkit. And so the idea here is you can, even if you're not an elder or leader on the council or whatever, you can let people know about this. So even your influencing to let someone know there's some free grant funded resources will be a big help. But specifically on that one, when I became senior pastor, it was interesting. I did not know what my salary was going to be. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is I went through the whole candidating process. And I'll just give you the numbers. So I was making $120,000 a year. Felt God called me to be a senior pastor. And actually, he did some other things in our life to say, Brian, I want you to live at $50,000 a year. So my wife and I made some adjustments for a year to do that. And then we're giving away all the rest. We're living on 50 and giving the rest. So, but anyway, so then I had about a year period before I was a pastor, and I went through the whole candidating process. And when they finally said, yes, we want you to come, we want you to be your pastor. And then they said, oh, we probably should talk to you about the finances. It had never come up in the candidating process. And I had a family. My kids were 4, 6, and 8 years old. We had lived 1,000 miles away. We're going to move to Colorado. And then I said to them, I said, okay, well, a year ago, God led me to change my lifestyle to live on 50,000. Now you go ahead and tell me what your salary is. And they said, wow, that's interesting. It's 50,000. So God had prepared us for a year of preparation to make some changes in our life. And so I came in at, from 120, it's down $70,000 to $50,000 salary. And so, okay, so that was me. So, but then I had staff, and then we were hiring staff during my time, and I was trying to talk to the board about paying people, and they were just coming up with random ideas on how much to pay people. And one guy goes, oh, I don't think we should pay more than this, or someone else would say, well, I think this, but it was all just somewhat out of their own ignorance or their own opinion. So I said, we need something more solid than our opinions. So there's a couple different websites in this article, and I went to those websites. I purchased the salary information. I said, okay, a worship pastor, a church in our city, our part of the country, our size, their experience, their education, they should be paid. And then we lined up all of our salaries over a couple of years. We lined them all up with national averages, not opinions of a few random leaders. And not only, and we also lined it up with benefits. What kind of benefits are normal? So it really took it out of the place of the board just having varying opinions, and really said what is research and what's fair, what is truly fair for a staff member or a pastor to receive. And we need to make sure we're in that space or close to that or working towards that. Even I'm part of a 4-year-old church plant right now, and I just had a conversation with my senior pastor. I'm like the elder chairman, and I just said, hey, we need to review salaries. We got 5 people on staff, and I need to buy some salary research, and we need to be moving in this direction. Because even before in my current church, they were kind of randomly paying people, and we need to really step it up and do a better job.
Well, I love that as an objective third-party database decision, because honestly, if you have a a variety of people within that board at a variety of standards of living, it can become even a difficult conversation among that group to say what is an appropriate standard of living in our city, and those types of things. So I love that suggestion. The second way that you recommended to bless your church, and this is pastor and staff, so I think that's an important element to this, is to participate in the Bless Your Pastor movement. And I have so many questions about that one. I'm going to just put that one on the back burner. We're going to come back and do a separate podcast on that. But the third one is this: to provide employee benefits in your compensation package. You mentioned that briefly. Anything you would add to that in terms of what you've seen and why that's so important?
Yeah, a thriving pastor is going to lead to a thriving ministry. Struggling pastor is going to lead to a struggling ministry. So pastors need book money or software money, or they need to be able to go to a conference. If they go out to take someone out to lunch for church business, they need to be able to bring in that receipt and turn that in. They do need health care. They do need retirement accounts. I had life insurance at my church, disability insurance. Some of those things are not very expensive from the church's standpoint, but they're very life-giving and life-changing for the minister. So those kinds of things are just very valuable and very important. I recently was with one pastor, and this is a sad story, but it's true. I was talking to him. He has a church of about 75 people. I think the budget's about $75,000. He works 60 hours a week. His wife works 30 to 40, so 90 to 100 hours between them. And this year the church came to him and said, okay, pastor, you can have $40,000 and you can use that any way you want. You can use it for salary and housing and retirement and health care and ministry expenses. It's all up to you. Any way you want to use it, you can use it. $40,000.
Wow.
And he had nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
And then they even hosted people in their home, once or twice a week. They paid for all the food. And they did not have a system in that church where he could turn in receipts or anything like that. So that was and he's a dear friend. But I said, how are you doing? He goes, well, we're serving the Lord. We love our congregation and God called us here and we're serving the Lord. So they were, toughening it. They were, doing the best they could, but very difficult situation.
Well, and in some ways, you think there's not a handful of jobs in this country that somebody who has usually at least a college education, if not a master's of divinity, would walk in, take a job without knowing what a pay is, not be able to provide for their family or provide medical and just some of the basic things that somebody working at Target or McDonald's would have as a salaried employee. So I do think there is a call, and I love the fact I'm not in that role right now, and I'm not talking to my church, so I can be a little bit further in that to say, if you want to have health in your church, what you said, a thriving pastor, that is important. In the same way, it would put a stress on any family if they were worried about what if one of our kids gets sick, or how are we going to take care of ourselves when we get older, or all of those things. The churches can make really simple but important decisions to value the people that God has called, from the senior pastor all the way through the entire staff. So I love what you're doing. So the next one is, you referred to a little bit, properly set up a plan to reimburse for ministry expenses. Again, that's a great thing. Anything you would add to that?
It's kind of what I said. There needs to be a plan, but to do it legally, so this is something that some people don't know. IRS rules have changed in just the last couple of years, and pastors used to be able to just take ministry expenses off of their income taxes. That's no longer the case. So that kind of benefit went away to deduct those expenses. So the only way they can truly get helped with ministry expenses is the church has to have a system set up where you turn in receipts and you're reimbursed. So in the past, the pastor just kind of eat those and then put them on his tax return and get a little bit of a tax break. But the really proper system is if you are doing things on behalf of your church, you're going to hospital calls for mileage, you're taking someone to lunch, and you're hosting people in your home. Anything that's ministry related, you should have a system set up where that gets turned into the church, and then you're reimbursed for that.
Well, and I would say, especially at a smaller church, someone in your church, that in some ways I can see a pastor thinking, great, one more thing for me to keep up with. Somebody who has the gift of accounting or administration can say, hey, I can help you with that. So there's ways that we can all come around a pastor. And
I want to add something on that. So on my phone, I was terrible keeping track of my expenses. They actually put in a Brian Kluth rule that if expenses weren't turned in within 90 days, they weren't going to get reimbursed. I hated turning in expenses. So I was really bad. But on my phone, I have an app called Expensify. So now all I have to do is take a picture of the receipt, and then once a month I go in there and code it, and it's much easier. And now I do turn in my expenses every month.
Fantastic. That's great. The last one that we'll be able to dive into, and then we'll briefly mention the last two. Number 5 is offer time off and time away. Speak into that about how important that might be.
Yeah, the average pastor doesn't work 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week. Many are 60 and 70. They don't work overtime. They work all the time. It's not a 1 day a week position. It's more of a 7 day a week lifestyle. It's on call 365 days a year. I had calls 4 o'clock in the morning, when someone died. We have funerals and weddings and events and early morning meetings and lunch meetings and evening meetings and committee meetings and meetings on top of meetings. And so it's an all the time thing. And so you really need to work with your staff, because ministry can take all of your time. So at our church, I really insisted that staff have for sure 2 days off. In my case, it was 2 days off a week. On their calendar, they had 2 days off that they took. And it might have been Friday and Saturday or Friday and a Monday or whatever it was, because Sunday was kind of a work day. So one is really setting that up as an expectation as a leader or as a pastor. You need time off. Even the young church I'm part of, they were making our staff take time off. But another one is vacation time. But here is where the Bless Your Pastor comes in. A lot of pastors need vacations, but they truly don't have the money to go on a family vacation. So somebody has a mountain home or vacation home, timeshare, anything that you can gift to your pastor to let them get away. That would be a huge, huge help. And then I also really believe in sabbaticals. I personally have done 7 sabbaticals over 35 years. I'm coming up on my 4th one. My 8th one. My 8th one's coming up next year. And having a system in place. And in my church, my last church, I had 3 months off that they gave me in that sabbatical year. So setting that up, and it's very life-giving, life-changing. I like to use those 2 phrases because pastors need to rejuvenate, and people need to respect the boundaries and respect them as people and their families. So that's just a really important area.
Well, I could not agree more. I know for our own family, we had 2 sabbaticals, and it was as important for our kids as it was for my husband. It was to be able to know that they were prioritized, and there was some time that our family was given to be a family and to not be on call all the time. Was a gift to them. So I fully concur with it. The last 2 that I'll mention just briefly, to legally approve housing allowance for pastoral staff, and then also to conduct annual reviews and planning sessions. And so as we wrap up this podcast, Brian, and you think about the opportunity that a church staff and really in this situation, the elder board or the leadership team of the particular church, what parting words would you give to anyone that sits in those seats or has influence on those who do?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is avail yourself to proven resources. You don't have to self-invent solutions. There are things that are out there. There's things that others have worked hard on to think about and to develop answers and solutions. So I would encourage them to go to the blessyourpastor.org. They can get the article that we've just been talking about. They can get the Bless Your Pastor materials and take advantage of those things that are freely available to you and become wiser. The Bible says in the multitude of counselors, there's safety and victory. and a man of knowledge increases in strength. And so gaining the knowledge of others and other experts and authors and thinkers on important topics will really help you and help your leadership and help your pastor and staff and help your congregation. So that's the biggest thing I would say is take advantage of what's available to you. Or if you're not in leadership, make those resources available to somebody that is in leadership.
Great. Well, Brian, I can't thank you enough for joining us for this Zoomcast and for what you're doing to get an important message out to the body of Christ. I know that blessyourpastor.org is one resource that people can go to. If people are interested in having you come and share at their church or to their denomination, is there anywhere that they would go to reach you specifically?
Sure, there's a couple things. BrianKluth.org. BrianKluth.org is my speaking, my public ministry website. All my things I've written are on there. But also NAEfinancialhealth.org. That's all free grant-funded materials, and it's solutions and resources and training all online for pastors and church leaders. And so they can go to NAEfinancialhealth.org. Everything there is free. And there's some great materials to help them navigate personal finance, church generosity, pastor compensation. So those are great resources, and they're all grant funded, they're all free, and they're available to anybody watching. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all that information, and thank you for joining us for this Lead Like Jesus podcast. We hope you're enjoying the leadership conversations, and if you want more information on Lead Like Jesus, just go to leadlikejesus.com, and we'll see you next time.